While we're waiting for the Matrix Resurrections, it's time to recall how the original trilogy was made and see what enormous struggles the cast faced behind the scenes. Let's find out how many actors got severely injured and needed surgeries, even before filming.
What were we going to do? Was I going to be out of the film?
Plus, you'll see which character was supposed to be gender fluid. Watch till the end to learn more about the so-called Matrix curse.
It was real trauma.
The one who does it all. Let's start with an ode to the all-beloved Keanu Reeves. We all know what a dedicated guy he is. Since the very beginning of his career, he has done his own stunts. But sometimes Keanu goes a little too far with his dedication. Remember the scene where Neo escapes from his office and walks on the edge at an enormous height? Keanu did that himself. Thankfully, the filming of this scene was smooth, but that wasn't always the case. Even before the production of The Matrix began, Reeves was recovering from a spinal cord injury, and at the beginning of his 4-month-long training, the actor had to wear a neck brace. To be honest, he looked quite funny, but he did his best to train, as usual. Keanu later revealed to the Rolling Stone that he had one old compressed disc and one shattered disc in his spine. It caused problems with his balance, so he had to undergo surgery. And yet, since he's the breathtaking Keanu, he performed all the stunts by himself despite still suffering from pain in his neck during filming. However, there was one precaution the actor followed: he couldn't put too much strain on his back. For this reason, Neo's fight sequences were choreographed in a way that, at least, prevented him from kicking too much. You have to be careful, Keanu. We love you way too much to see you hurt. But Reeves was far from being the only injured actor on the set of The Matrix. Hugo Weaving halted the production. Only 2 days into his training, the Agent Smith actor suffered a serious trauma to his hip.
So we went to see a very good doctor. In fact, it was Keanu's doctor, who immediately diagnosed that I had this thing that I couldn't walk, and I had an edema in my bone marrow.
He needed surgery and then had to use crutches for 6 weeks. But Hugo kept on coming to the training because he still wanted to be a part of the process, and it led to quite amusing small talk between him and Keanu.
It's funny because he had the hip and I had the neck. So it became housed the hip and housed the neck.
To allow Weaving to recover, the production was completely shifted. They planned everything so that all of his fight scenes were moved to the end of the shoot. When you think about it, it sounds like a huge deal, right? After all, it would be much easier to just recast Weaving than postpone everything like that. The directors reportedly talked about replacing him and considered French actor Jean Reno for the part, but they quickly ditched the idea and decided to wait. It looked like the Wachowskis knew from the very beginning that Hugo was the perfect Agent Smith. And they were totally right. Interestingly, there was someone else who also risked being recast due to an injury. Carrie-Anne Moss worked through the pain. The Matrix training was vigorous. While Moss was preparing to perform her famous scorpion kick, yep, this one. And yep, she did it herself, like many other stunts in The Matrix. So while the actress was training for this scene, she hurt her ankle really badly. But Carrie-Anne didn't tell anyone about it at first and continued doing her job, despite the severe pain. Moss wasn't that famous back then, so she immediately thought she might lose the role if she revealed her injury. This incident showed the Wachowskis and everyone else how dedicated she was to playing Trinity. I'm sure no one even thought about recasting her. I mean, who else would work through the pain like that, right? But it turns out that Moss got off lightly. Some of her co-stars fell victim to the so-called Matrix curse. Watch till the end to see what I'm talking about. And now, let's see how The Matrix was too smart. The movies are quite hard to understand fully. All the intricacies of The Matrix, how the machines rule everyone, and how the real world actually works. Even some of the actors found it confusing. For example, Sean Connery and Russell Crowe refused to appear in the films because they were so baffled by the plot. But there was one actor who understood the script from the first reading. That was Laurence Fishburne. In fact, he was even surprised that so many people were confused by it. For him, the plot made total sense. But the Morpheus actor said that his only concerns was that the film would be too smart for a Hollywood blockbuster. Well, The Matrix really is different from most of the other hit movies, but thankfully it didn't go amiss, although some other challenges almost put an end to it. A penny saved, a penny earned. No one had any idea whether the first film would become a hit, especially considering its complicated plot. So the studio didn't want to take a risk and refused to put too much money into it. For example, the crew had to cut down their expenses for costumes. Those cool leather jackets were actually made of faux leather. and Neo's iconic coat was made using a cheap wool weave. You could never tell, right? This is all thanks to the costume designer, Kim Barrett, who put a lot of thought into creating the costumes. She incorporated a mix of cultures and religions to craft a unique style: 18th century Chinese warriors, Japanese samurai, and even robes of clergy leaders. All these combined resulted in the film's costumes. And despite the low cost, the legendary look deeply inspired Christian Dior's 1999 fall collection. But I bet that in their case, the cost was much higher. Another thing that helped the Matrix crew reduce costs was choosing a proper location. The film was shot in Australia exactly for that reason. It allowed them to cut the budget to $60 million, while in the United States, it would have cost about twice as much. Sure, it sounds really cool, but filming in Australia came with a twist. The helicopter scene that changed laws. And I don't mean the laws of physics, but the actual laws. Let me explain. You definitely remember the scene where Neo and Trinity rescue Morpheus on a helicopter. It looks cool and all, but this sequence caused a lot of problems. It had to be shot in New South Wales, where flying a helicopter violated quite a few air traffic laws. Bummer. The crew were already thinking about how to change the scene when the government decided to do them a huge favor. They changed their laws to allow them to use a helicopter. Can you believe how much the Australians believed in the film from the very beginning? Because why else would they do that? And we're thankful to them for that, because the helicopter scene is one of the most memorable sequences in the trilogy. But the Australian government officials weren't the only guys who had to change something to make the movie happen. The original idea behind Switch, although it hadn't been made public yet, the Wachowskis were already struggling with gender identity while making the first Matrix film. So it's no wonder that they wanted to add a character who'd reflect this struggle. It was supposed to be Switch. Although we only saw her as a woman in the film, the character was supposed to change gender. Upon entering the Matrix, Switch would be female, and in the real world, male. Hence the name, actually. Unfortunately, Warner Brothers insisted that Switch's gender fluidity was removed from the final script.
Right now, there's only one rule. Our way or the highway.
And the character became female only. It was a huge blow for the Wachowskis. So they decided to give Switch an androgynous look to somehow channel the original idea into the character anyway. Isn't it a shame that the gender fluidity aspect was changed? If it had remained in the final script, the film would be even more revolutionary. Switch would be a perfect trans metaphor and a great inspiration for millions of trans and gender fluid people. But I guess the world wasn't ready for it yet. And finally, let's talk about The Matrix Curse. Believe it or not, the production of the trilogy was followed by a string of unfortunate events. We've already talked about most of the lead actors being severely injured and needing surgeries even before the filming began, but there were also cast members who passed away. For example, Aaliyah played Z in The Matrix Reloaded. She was supposed to return in The Matrix Revolutions, but she tragically died in an airplane crash not too long before the production began. She was only 22. Another actress who passed away after appearing in the first two films was Gloria Foster. She played the Oracle, and The Matrix Reloaded became her last role. Some Matrix fans have a theory that Keanu has also been a victim of this curse. His child was stillborn, and then he broke up with his beloved girlfriend, who later died in a car accident. These tragedies happened after the first film was made. That sounds like a lot of evidence for the curse, but do you believe in it? Share in the comments below. If you want to know more about Keanu's tragic life story and see how he's managed to remain the kindest man ever despite everything, watch the video we made about it, and stay awesome!